Hi everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm joined on the show today with my co-host Hilary Ramo. We're going to be talking to Barbara Ann Clow. We're going to be discussing her latest novel, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal. It's a debut novel from best-selling author Barbara Ann Clow, an intricately layered erotic thriller that reveals esoteric teachings on prophecy, power, ritual, and divination. It includes dramatic insights into suppressed discoveries of the first Christian heretics and secret power rituals at work in the Vatican. Barbara Ann Clow is the author of The Pleiadian Agenda and The Main Code. And we've had Barbara on the show in the past before, and I believe Hilary has had Barbara on the show too. We haven't been all on the show together, so what an exciting event today. Hilary, are you with me on the call?
I am here. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk to you and Barbara about this wonderful book. It's a great project, and I'm excited to talk about it in depth. Thanks for everybody for joining us. I also wanted to mention that Barbara Ann Clow is an internationally acclaimed ceremonial teacher. She is also a Mayan calendar researcher, and one of her favorite books that she's written that I have studied in depth, Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, the 2011-2012 prophecies. Barbara and I were on the airwaves when I was on Achieve Radio, and we did numerous shows that year. I believe we did 4 or 5 shows where we talked in depth about the 2012 prophecies. So this is my first time back on the air with Barbara since we did those series. So I'm really excited to do this show today.
Wow. Yeah, you know, Barbara's doesn't need much introduction. Barbara's a heavy-hitting author. We have a fiction book today. I kind of think this is like a historical fiction book, though. It's got a bit of everything in there. Fascinating book. Let's get Barbara on the show. Let's get this show on the road. Hi, Barbara. Are you on the call? Are you with us?
Yeah, hi. I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk to both of you.
Wow, great to have you back, Barbara. Nice to have us all on the same call today. Barbara, I guess tell us about the characters first and foremost. Always with a fiction book, energetic characters, enigmatic. You talk in the start of the book about the characters came to you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
About how the material came to me. A little glitch came over your radio line.
Yeah,
how the material came to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've actually wanted to write fiction my whole life. It's kind of been sitting in there boiling and waiting to go. And then in May of 2011, all of the characters that are in this book, except for one, appeared in my writing studio. And I wasn't writing a nonfiction book at that time. And as you know, I had written nonfiction for 40 years. And so these characters all appeared, and it was clear I needed to write everything down that was going on. So I got out a yellow pad. And they gave me their names, ages, background, current activities, pursuits, things they were fascinated with. And it was really an incredible thing because they were all connected with each other and they were all extremely interesting. And so I decided to write a novel with these characters as the people in the novel. And I did it.
Wow. There's something realistic about the characters. I don't know what it is. I think it's the layers of complexity, the level of detail on them. There's something very real life going on. It's almost like you're describing real events. I think but there's a dynamic with the characters as well. How does the characters develop for you? You say the characters came to you, but tell us how they develop with you and how you get them to interact in the storyline.
Yeah, well, since they appeared as a group, in a group like that, I didn't plot the novel. I never plotted it even when I got toward the end of it. I just simply sat down and let them do their thing. And as you know, it starts out with a romance with 2 of the characters, and then it builds in complexity. And also, this is a multi-generational book because the parents of the young people in the book are also major characters. And as it unfolded, I began to realize that what I was really doing was creating a new theater for writing about multidimensionality. And regarding multidimensionality, I think my most important work is Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. And I think Hilary agrees with that because she loves that book. And what I did with it is, first of all, I brought in this teaching about 9 dimensions of consciousness, which first started with the Pleiadians and then came through alchemy in a much more scientific way. And then I went out and taught. I taught workshops for about 20 years, activating 9 dimensions of consciousness. But I think what I was really seeking was a way to convey this material in a really entertaining and complex way. And what I've discovered is that fiction is definitely the way to do this, because different characters in the book have affinities and natural comfort with different dimensions. And so actually the characters are actually playing out the roles of different dimensions in the book. Of course, this isn't, I don't say this in the book, but it's actually what's going on. For example, Armando Pierleone is very fourth dimensional. So that's how it happened. It just really unfolded, and I'm working on the sequel now, and with the same group of characters, and it's doing the same thing. It's just unfolding. I'm not plotting it.
Well, I found something very interesting in the book, Barbara, when I read it, was being familiar with your work. I could see you doing that, and you did that very well. That was one of the things that I really liked about the story, was that there was so much going on in between the words and in between, what you were actually giving, that if anybody, any reader familiar with your work would know that some of that material that you have been talking about for years and years was masterfully woven into the characters and their storylines and how they evolved through the book. So you did a great job of that. And I get so excited when I talk about this book, because it feels like you were able to really bring a lot of information out in this book that you normally may not have been able to bring out necessarily in a nonfiction. Did you happen to feel that as you were writing it, that there was more freedom in this?
Oh, yeah. Freedom is a fiction. Freedom is so much fiction. Fiction is so much freedom. In other words, I get a lot of freedom out of writing fiction. And I never thought of those two words together like that. But it did give me the chance to create nuances and to create energy in between things. That's very well put by you. And I've only done a few book signings because the book just came out. But the readers are telling me that reading this book is like having a Reiki session or something like that. That
wow.
It is such a full creation of an energy, a full multidimensional body. And I just don't think I could have done it any other way except by means of storytelling and characters. And the characters in this book are really intelligent. I just deliberately decided I'm so bored with so much fiction because a lot of the characters are just stupid. They're people I'd never want to meet. And so these characters are people that I'd like to hang out with, and have lunch with and talk to. And so it's a deep conversation between some very, very interesting individuals.
Wow. Tell us about the setting in the book, and that will lead us into some of the issues in the book too.
Yeah, well, then the issue for the characters. Now, this is not my issue, but for the characters, their issue was how does evil get into the world? How does evil get into the world, and how does it affect us, and how do we deal with evil? And so one of the characters is a New York Times reporter who's an investigator on priestly sexual abuse in the Catholic Church primarily. And I thought that was a really great background topic, because if I was going to pick anything in the world that is just blatantly evil, it's the abuse of children in the Catholic Church. And so that's kind of the background material. And then, of course, it got into, of course, the novel is set in Rome and in Tuscany. And this gave me the opportunity to explore some of the attributes in the church itself that might make it a place for evil to come creeping in. So it goes into really deep issues within Roman Catholicism. And I used to be Catholic, and then finally had to leave because we had to fear for our children in our own parish. So this is also deeply personal. It goes back to 30 years ago when we had to take our kids and our family out of the church.
Well, I think it's also very relevant current event-wise. Many people are dealing with their own feelings. We have Pope Francis touring the world and turning on the love and compassion and really giving people a different sense of the church, if you will. And your book is timely in that, because it's almost like the church has decided to go ahead and redo a new PR campaign so that they come out looking much better than they really are. And Pope Francis has a Jesuit background, and I think you're familiar with, the intricacies of that, that branch of it as well. And people are trying to kind of feel their way into what they think and how they feel about him. So when your book came out, I felt it was also very astrologically aligned, which I'm sure that I'm assuming that you had something to do with that. And we have these blood moons. He came to the United States recently, did some masses and rituals, and there was a lot of talk about what he was really doing in Philadelphia after he gave his mass there over the blood moon. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that as we go through the hour about how these current events relate into your character story and the information you were able to get out through this book.
Yeah, it's a good point, Hillary, because the novel, I had written the first novel, and it was about 50% finished at the point when Cardinal Ratzinger resigned. So in other words, I'd gotten the novel half done already. And it's almost as if I wrote the novel right up looking for that moment. And so when it happened in February 2013, that's when Ratzinger resigned, I went, oh my God, I've really got a book here. And so I'd just like you to know that astrologically, I didn't time anything in this book or pick any subject matter for relating to astrology. However, there's a background astrological issue, which is the change of the great ages. And for the last 2,000 years, we've been in the age of Pisces, and now we're moving into Aquarius. And so this trilogy, I did write this trilogy intending to track the shift from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. So that part is astrological. But otherwise, I think, to tell you the truth, when I was writing the book, you'd have to say, well, how did I sit down and write a novel without plotting anything? It'd be kind of the first question. And to tell you the truth, I sat down every day from 9 to 12 in the morning, and I felt like I was transcribing a book that had already been written. And that's been an amazing experience. Like, what I've had to do is I've had to get myself out of the way as much as possible and let it come in the way it wanted to come in. And then, of course, I've used the skills and knowledge I have to enhance that. So I think I'm right. I'm in the sequel, writing the sequel right now, and I'm dealing with Pope Francis. And then just as my book comes out, that's just when Francis comes to the United States. So there's something going on here with some play between major events and what I'm creating.
Well, I've always seen that. I've always seen your work aligned with that. And I know you've done that intentionally in the past, and a lot of your astrology work aligns with current events. And as people get to know your work and they read through it, they realize that you have something going on. And I also know that when you wrote the Pleiadian Agenda, you were writing things that were almost channeled in. And then later on, when you wrote like Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, you then found some very scientific material that had, come up into the collective consciousness that allowed you to tie in some of the psychic agenda stuff that you had been putting in your earlier books. So in a way, when you describe your writing process of this book, it doesn't surprise me one bit that you're writing it aligned with all these timing things, because you've been doing that your whole career. At least that's how I perceive it.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. And that's why I'm devoting every minute of the rest of my life to that, because I do seem to have some kind of unusual skill, for example, or unusual ability to kind of tune into the muse or read dimensional levels. And when the Pleiadian Agenda came, which, as you know, was a channeled book, and I channeled it over a period of 4 months, I channeled the book right when Edward Witten was writing his calculations for superstring theory. And now Witten, of course, has gotten the Nobel Prize for that recently. And so Alchemy of Nine Dimensions and the Pleiadian Agenda are actually a development of string theory. And somehow, for some weird reason, I was tuning into that vibration. And so this vibration that I'm tuning into now seems to be really the issue of that change out of the age of Pisces, because the age of Pisces was the age of major religions, Catholicism, Judaism, and Islam. And we're definitely moving into a new field here. I don't think that the major religions are going to go away, but I think they're going to go through major transformations. And that's what I'm attempting to really tune into, because it's very intense and confusing for people. And any way that I can tune into that and then storytell through people about that, I think is quite helpful.
Yeah, I think this body of work and the sequel will be something that people can digest in whatever dimensional perspective they're coming from. And that's what makes your work so powerful, is that you're very aligned and in tuned with that thread of energy. You can tap into the collective and you can assimilate that information down into something that's practical for other people to put to use. And this book does a great job of it. I'm curious, the ruby crystal, when you began to write the book, did you have some musing on the ruby crystal? When did the ruby crystal come to you, being the title of the book?
Yeah, the ruby crystal as a stone came to me about 30 years ago. And it's it's not an expensive ruby. It's not one of those cut clear ones. It's like a cabochon or like a ruby star crystal. And it's large, about 10 carats. And it was given to me by a friend of mine who was a crystal and gem dealer. And this friend was named Thaddeus. And Thaddeus had AIDS, and he knew he was going to die. And he knew that his wealthy Philadelphia family would take everything that he had as soon as he died. So he passed out 3 key stones at that point, one of them to me and 2 of them to 2 other healers. And so he gave me the ruby crystal. And then I started tuning into it, and I could tell that it was a really old stone. And I had psychics read it. And 3 separate psychics all said the same thing about this stone, that it had been in the head of a Buddha, had been in the third eye of a Buddha in Nepal 10,000 years ago, in the region that's called Nepal.
Wow.
And so since 3 psychics said that separately, I had to accept the fact that that was probably true. And the stone is cut in a way, jewelers have told me that it's a very strange old form of cutting. So that's what the ruby crystal is. So when these characters came through and when this novel came in, it was clear to me that it was going to come through the ruby crystal. So it was kind of dormant for about 30 years until a few years ago.
We're just coming up to break, so just for the webpage, you can go to capricornradio.com for the free archives and capricornmembers.com for the HD TV and MP3 archives. But for now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. The Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grinnin of Ailloch Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox event alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noath and Doath, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tuatha De Danann's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the tours events page for more details at jamesswagger.com. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and don't forget to check out the archives at capricornmembers.com. You can subscribe for membership, doing a lifetime membership deal at the moment. And of course you can still check out the free archives at capricornradio.com. And then HDTV shows as well on the Capricorn members page. But for now...
So is it fair to say then that you you use the stone as a muse when you've been.
Yes, yeah. Ever since I started, I had it set so I could wear it on my finger, and I've been wearing it whenever I'm wearing it right now. Whenever I go any place regarding this novel, I wear it almost all the time. But if you think about it, Hillary, since you know my work so well, and this is, I think, what happened, but I didn't know it was happening at the time. I think Sarah, the main female character in the novel who becomes psychic by using the ruby crystal, I think that she is probably revealing my own psychic patterns and awakenings. But I didn't realize that. I just let her fly, and she just did her thing.
Well, I like how Simon came into the picture, and Sarah and Simon began this kind of dance, if you will, of interaction that allowed them to really go into the information that they were both researching, put them together, and begin to kind of create this incredible opening where they had access to all of that. So I'm in love with the book, and if you can't tell that, I don't know what to say, but I'm in love with the book. I've been in love with the book. When you sent me the galleys to read, I was so excited. And a couple years ago, it's interesting that you said that about the crystal. A couple years ago, you had sent me a ruby crystal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was wearing it and holding it while I was reading through the book, and I kind of had a similar out of body type experience with the whole rock. But I've turned it into that because I've been so enchanted with the whole thing. And so where do you find what was the most difficult part of this book? I know sometimes it's beginning, middle, and ends that writers have that struggle with, and I'm curious which is your most challenging, writing the beginning of a book, the middle of a book, or an end of a book?
It's about 10 times as hard to write fiction as nonfiction. You have to have a tremendous amount of trust. You just have to let it flow. And so it's been difficult all the way through. And editing has been difficult on the first book because I had to learn how to do fiction in 3 years. And, I didn't go to college and study creative writing. And so the editors helped me a lot with this book. But then what happened is I learned from the editors. And so I'm noticing now that I'm writing the sequel is coming in. I think it's going to need much less editing. So I've been on a major learning curve here. Wow. Big one.
Sure. Do you find yourself getting into the mindset of the characters in any way?
Into the what of the characters?
The mindset.
Yes. What I would say would be that I think I am a natural fiction writer because if you're going to do it, mm-hmm. you need to literally go into the character. You need to be able to eat their food, and you need to be able to smell the atmosphere around them. You need to be able to see the nature and the surroundings around them. You need to be able to feel how they would respond if another character asked them a certain question. And I do that very naturally, possibly because I'm the author of the Mind Chronicles trilogy. Now, the Mind Chronicles trilogy is a series of 3 books that I wrote back in the 1980s and early 1990s, based on 100 sessions under hypnosis into my past lives. And the book isn't really all about my past lives. The book is actually, the Mind Chronicles trilogy is actually really fiction, although it comes from these sessions. But it's fiction in the sense that I learned how to go into each one of these so-called past lives, each one of these characters, and see reality through their eyes and experience life through their minds. And I think that you can't write fiction unless you can do that, probably.
Wow. Is there any aspects of you in there, Barbara? Your education or your own philosophy or your background, anything in there belonging to you?
Yeah, very good question. Sarah, the main female character, is getting her PhD in patristics patristics is the study of early church fathers at a school in Birmingham, England, a college. And in my case, I graduated from Matthew Fox's program back in 1982 in creation-centered spirituality, which I've got a master's in theology in that program. And I wanted to get a PhD, and I wanted to get a PhD in early church studies. And the reason I wanted to do it is because it's very clear to me that in 400 AD, we took a really, really wrong turn on the whole issue of who Jesus really was. In my universe, Jesus was a remarkable being, and the church just took a wrong turn in the 4th century with the adoption of the church by Constantine. It turned the church into an empire, a hierarchical empire. And so I really wanted to get into what went wrong at that point. But my problem with getting a PhD is I had 4 children and a job, and there was no way. And so Sarah is fulfilling my desire 30 years later of getting a PhD in patristics. So there's little elements like that in the novel. I think in any novel there's going to be elements of the author's background and life for sure.
Wow. I had Matthew on the show before. He's a lovely guy, Matthew. I had a great chat with him.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He's really been supportive too. He's one of those people who, what we say, he walks his talk.
He walks his talk.
Genuinely does in his life. Yeah.
Hell of a smart guy as well.
Yeah.
What research did you do, Barbara, for the, if any? I'm guessing if you're going to write about the Vatican or anything that you got to kind of know the structure and historical documents or historical framework, or what research, or if any, did you do?
Well, the research in this book is as intense as it would be for a nonfiction book, except I don't have to footnote it. And so in the book, there are various people who are involved with the crisis in the church, the priestly abuse issue. And there are other things going on in the book, like the issue of archaeology in Rome and archaeology in Israel and in Jerusalem. And all of the factual material in this book is absolutely accurate. So therefore, it took a tremendous amount of research. And it's tricky stuff, especially the material on priestly sexual abuse. And one of the main priestly sexual abuse researchers, by the way, Father Thomas Doyle, endorsed this book, which made me very happy because I quoted him. There's a few cases where I quote somebody in the novel, and if I do, that's an accurate quote. So it's really the same level of accuracy, but no footnotes and no bibliography.
Wow. Nice to have an endorsement from a priest then.
Pardon?
Nice to have an endorsement from a priest then.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, this is a deep examination of what's going on in Catholicism. And even though this is a highly critical book in terms of the church hierarchy and the church behavior, number one, how can anybody be anything but critical about what has been going on? Sure. And it's another thing that's been going on for a couple of thousand years, too. This is not just now. This is the past also. And so this book is not meant to tear the Catholic Church up and dump it in the garbage at all. No way. This book is meant to deeply question the very foundation of the various aspects of the church. And, of course, when an author writes a book, the author also goes on a learning curve. And writing this book gave me the opportunity to really explore the sacraments. For example, confession and communion and the holy order's ordination. And I think some of the writing in this book with the various Italian characters, especially discussing the sacraments, I think is very, very profound, because one of the things that goes on with the sacraments, and of course I've been a Catholic and I participated in them, and they are very deep and very intense and very, very meaningful. But if the church creates any kind of perversion, any kind of thing going on that kind of makes the sacraments not what they're meant to be. For example, in the novel, one of the characters is raped by a priest during his first confession when he's a small boy. Now, there's an issue there with what's going on with that sacrament at that time. So I got very deeply into that stuff, and to tell you the truth, I was fascinated myself, very fascinated by it.
How do you think that energy affects, from an energy standpoint, as, a clairvoyant, as somebody who channels material, how do you feel that would affect the ritual and ripple outward towards those who participate in it?
Well, let's assume that particularly in a sacramental situation, let's assume it's very multidimensional, which in my world it is, because it grounds the earth forces, it creates tremendous energy in the third and fourth dimension, and then the higher dimensions are involved. And so the way I would answer that, Hillary, because that's a really hard question to answer, but it also has to do with how we deal with evil. So it's like worth pursuing this question. And in my experience, the more a person understands the 9 dimensions of consciousness, and the more you're able to read which dimension is functioning. Is it the 4th dimension that's going on here, or is it the 6th dimension? And the more you're able to do that, in my opinion, the more you're able to comprehend what you're doing, for example, in something like a ritual or a sacrament. And then when it comes to the issue of evil penetrating reality and coming into the world, one of the things I found myself doing with this novel, this is not something that was intended, it happened, especially through Armando Pierleone, the person who's struggling with the 4th dimension to such a high degree. And what I discovered is that if the person who's struggling with evil has a more multidimensional perspective and has the ability to see and feel what's actually happening to them, I think they have a much, much higher potential for handling evil experiences in the world in a positive way. Because there's no way that we aren't all going to have to deal with evil experiences. That's just the way reality functions. The question is, what do we do about it?
So what is the answer to that? What do we do about it? And the second part to that question would be, do you think priests or people in that kind of work that they do in the world are more susceptible to that multidimensional perspective simply because they have to deal with those issues?
I'll answer the second question first, and then we'll see if we can fish the first one out. I think that holy orders are actually, I never thought about this till now, Hillary, but I think the holy orders are actually a functional, operational system for creating multidimensionality in the world. How's that?
I like that.
Yeah,
Wow.
But then the question is, and this is really what I'm after in this book. Okay, let's say that's true. Well, then the question of integrity comes in, because if what I just said is true, then anybody who is ordained and becomes a priest or whatever, bishop, cardinal, anyone who plays out one of those roles, and this includes politicians too, by the way, because politicians are fielding tremendous forces. And the minute that happens for them, what they're dealing with is they're dealing with power. Because the more you understand dimensionality, the more you understand how power functions. And that's where the issue then is integrity, is the central issue, pure and simple.
I never thought about it like that, actually.
No.
But I like that description. It sounds to me like it's almost like a grid system where people move around depending on what dimension they're coming from, depending where they're heading, where they're evolving into. But what I really resonated with this element of the book because it felt relative to what a lot of people deal with on, say, like a headline daily basis when they're watching CNN or they're seeing school shootings or they're trying to work their way and feelings through some kind of tragedy. And the people who are able to do what you just described seem to be able to move through those tragedies or even investigate those tragedies with much less attachment to the emotional field.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we're getting to some really subtle stuff that I know you're going to love here. But one of the things the Pleiadians told me is they said the deal with the end of the Mayan calendar, and this is 2011, 2012. I deal with 2 dates. And they say the deal with it is that the 9 dimensions of consciousness become fully open to humans. Now, if you and I even tried to have the conversation we're having right now 4 years ago, there's nobody listening to it who could understand it. But at this point in time, so many people are opening up multidimensional consciousness that they can actually understand what we're talking about. And I think this is a critical issue for people who are involved in the New Age. Because one of the things that annoys me about people who are deeply involved in the New Age, and I am too, so it's not a critique here, but I run into so many people who decide that a person is either good or bad. And, and like a guy like Obama is just plain bad just because he did this or that. Where for me, I operate with a whole spectrum on a person like Obama and on a person like Pope Francis. And I tune into their consciousness a lot because I think that they're thinking in a very multidimensional way. And then they somehow have to function, and they somehow have to act. And that's where I think we're going to another level, where we're going to have to let go of the idea that any person is just all bad. That everybody is a spectrum. Some are really bad, okay, but not all bad. Like Ratzinger, I think I did a very good job on Ratzinger. Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, the previous Pope, Pope Benedict XVI, is one of the most evil men who has ever visited this planet. But he's not all evil, if you see what I mean. You know?
I think they serve a purpose in creating that duality for us. So, we don't really know love unless we know hate, right? Would that be a fair statement to say? I mean, we have people who are on far ends of the spectrum, and then we have other people who are in the middle of the spectrum and able to manifest different facets of good and bad at different times, different facets of personality. But then when you have somebody like the Cardinal, who is just plain old, seems to live in that far end of that spectrum, I mean, in the bigger, more collective picture, those personalities, those souls that manifest to do that, do seem to serve some purpose for humanity on a bigger picture.
Yeah. When you get into the question of why is there a duality and why is the fourth dimension there, and the first answer to that is if you get into fundamental physics, it's just how reality works, and it's how our reality works for us psychologically. And so the fascinating thing about being able to write fiction is that if you think about it, if you go back to really great 19th century fiction, say Anthony Trollope or some of the great Thomas Hardy, some of the great English novelists, the novel is an opportunity to create a field from the first page to the last page where there's actually a multi-dimensional spectrum operating through the characters. A novel is an opportunity to explore that aspect of the human being. And I didn't write fiction. I didn't even try to publish fiction 40 years ago because I knew they wouldn't publish me. They might have published me in the 19th century, but not now. But now we're entering into a field where it's possible to start contemplating human behavior from that perspective. And then the other thing that fiction always did in the 19th century was fiction instructed people. Fiction attempted to get people out of being too biased in one direction or another. It attempted to help people understand dealing with evil forces, for example, dealing with sex and dealing with the issue of how evil can come into the sexual behavior of people. And so it's just been so much fun for me to bring that genre back because I think it's so valuable for the reader to be. In fact, I always watch Fareed Zakaria on Sunday morning. He's one of my favorite commentators. And Fareed actually said that he thinks people should read novels rather than go to business school in terms of getting some human experience. And I was floored when I heard him say that. But it is true that novels really open people up and really develop people's character.
Well, it brings up a question. When you talk about sex as this opportunistic type of platform for these things to come out, when you're dealing with such a sexual dysfunction within the church, predatory type behavior on children, raping that innocence out of the child, how do you see that? Can you just explain a little bit of how you see that energy moving through a large entity such as the Vatican, such as our religion, a religion like that, what that might do? I think that kind of goes along with the question of if somebody's not in their integrity and then gives out a sacrament or, helps somebody, you have that tainted energy in there. But what happens when we're dealing with a really dysfunctional sexual energy within the church system, planetary wise?
Yeah, and of course that's the subject of the whole novel. And what I'm after with it's the whole trilogy really is the issue of the hierarchy. And this goes back to David Icke and this whole issue of hierarchies being created, which is like a triangle where the people at the bottom have very little power, like the laity in the church. And then when you get into the priests and nuns in the church, they're further up the pyramid with more power. And then you get into the cardinals and finally the Pope. And the church is set up like totally as a power hierarchy. And then once you have a power hierarchy, hard words to say, then you get the issue of how the famous old setting, power corrupts. we know from observing human behavior in all ways that power corrupts most people. And so the issue would be, how does power corrupt, and what creates that opportunity to such an extreme degree? And the book is definitely passing the idea along that the whole hierarchy and the whole sacramental system within the church is sucking evil from lower dimensions into the third dimensional world of the church, because the hierarchy itself is out of its integrity. And this is where Pope Francis is so fascinating right now, because he's at the very top of that hierarchy, and he really seems to be attempting to change some things in a positive way. But he's still at the top of that hierarchy, and that's the struggle for me in the sequel, is to show how the hierarchy itself is corrupting Francis, which is what I think is going on.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Now, you say in your description of the book that Sarah, your main character here, she gets these visionary abilities. They're ignited with the use of this mystic ring. And you talk about how she remembers her past life as Sybil, and who's a Roman oracle whose powers are now being channeled by the Vatican to maintain world control. I'd like you to speak on that a little bit and explain what you mean by somebody's past life being channeled into such a, nuts and bolts type of organization. People would kind of read that and say, that doesn't make any sense. But knowing your work and knowing you, I know where you're headed with that, but I'd like you to share with our listeners a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, and if you read it carefully, and I know you did, but I'll just say it. She or Simon never says she's a past life of that the Sybil of Cumae is her past life, but she is definitely she's tuning into that strain, that divination strain. Now, if you were the Sybil of Cumae was a whole series of priestesses back from about maybe 700 BC to like around 100 AD in the Roman region and in Italy in general. And it was kind of like the Hebrew prophets in the sense, only in this case it was women were the Sibyls. And the Sibyls were very revered by the early church. The Sibyls are all over the Catholic churches, especially in Italy. So it isn't that that's her past life. It's only that she is tuning into that strain of consciousness. And if you think about it, it's actually the strain of consciousness of the goddess. And so one of the things that's developing in this book is there's only one answer to a reorganization and transformation of the hierarchy in the Catholic Church, and that's going to be the true addition of the wisdom of women. And what happened was the Sibyls played a very, very big role in the early church. And the only reason I figured this out is I spent time hanging out in Italy. And I was in Siena recently, and the Sibyls are just all over the place in the churches, especially in Siena. So the church at one time did draw on that deep feminine strain. And that's really what it's about in the novel. It's not about Sarah's past life. It's about bringing back that strain of the Sibyls, if you see what I mean.
Do you think that people can tune into that stream of consciousness lucidly and do that kind of work that your character does?
I don't know. I think the first question is, did I do it well enough? And I'm, of course, still working on that. So it is a trilogy in the sense that it's developing. But the issue for me as an artist was to do it well. And by the way, remember, I didn't plot this, Hillary. And so these strains, like sometimes Sarah would see visions of being having a past life in Portugal with Simon. And that one sounds like it's more like a real past life, 400 or 500 years ago. So that one was a past life issue. But most people actually do pick up on these things. It's called deja vu. And so the question would be, did I write about it well? It has to be subtle. You have to be very careful with that stuff. And I think people are responding to that. The Sibyls have really been lost to history because of the takeover by the male patriarchal control system. And maybe this book is going to revive, the wisdom of the Sibyls. That'd be very nice.
Wow. There's a lot of controversy in the book, Barbara. Vatican mysteries issues and stuff like that. I mean, you talk about the Vatican in a bad light, and anyway, it's a controversy. But you don't shy away from that, do you? But do you think about it? Do you think about the consequences of the controversy in the book?
This is where I may have a few tomatoes thrown at me, because one of the things that's going on in the novel is the issue of rituals going on under the Vatican itself, issues of the Black Mass and issues of communion going on down there. And what I'd like to say about that is this is the beauty of fiction, because people have been talking about these issues for about basically 2,000 years. There's constant talk about what goes on under the Vatican and Black Masses and all that kind of stuff. And so as a writer of fiction, I'm perfectly free to bring those elements into the book by means of psychic pickup. And then there are some things in this novel where I have actually been given direct information in the past about what's going on under the Vatican. And I'm not free to share that information or the names of these people. But the great thing about writing fiction is if there's something that I've heard about or something that I know, I'm perfectly free to put it in the book. And I'm going to lace all of my books with secret information as much as I possibly can.
I know you do, and I love that. I love reading your book because it's like an adventure. You're going through it, and I actually underlined things that I went and looked up and researched, and so it led me on my own little journey through some of the information. And, I have to say, you're right about this ongoing look into this darker side of the Vatican. Having been on the air for over 10 years, one of the things that, you can't help but hear in the alternative truth media is a lot of the conspiracy theories or things that are said or implied or suggested that are going on. So it's not really that unusual to hear some of these things if you've been listening to that content. The problem comes in sorting it out to see what is truthful and what isn't, because there's so much disinformation woven in through that.
Yeah, it's a work in progress too, and I'll give you some examples. One of the things that comes up in the novel is the third prophecy of Fatima. And the first two prophecies of Fatima have already been fulfilled with World War I and World War II, and also the atomic bomb. And the third prophecy is very reliably renewed. It's a rumor regarding things that were told to the Pope. But these rumors are fairly reliable, and basically our understanding is that the third prophecy of prophecy of Fatima, says that the East is going to dominate over the West and Islam is going to win over Christianity. Now, given what's going on in the Middle East right now, this is an utterly fascinating issue. And I think it's impossible not to take a look at whether that's what's going on. So that's one example. Another issue is the issue of Petrus Romanus, the last pope. And so, since I'm in the middle of a trilogy, and I've said the timeline on the trilogy is 2011 through about 2020. And if Pope Francis turns out to be Petrus Romanus, the last pope, well, that's really going to be fascinating. So I kind of have it set up where whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and I think we are going to be having some major revelations coming to us at this time.
Well, it goes along with the blood moon prophecies. Are you familiar with the fact that these last 4 blood moons have landed on exact biblical holidays? And this is one of the very rare time in history. And a lot of the Islamic prophecies are aligning with the fact that the last time some of this happened, Rome fell and we had some big empire changes. And they're riding on some of their other prophecies to move forward with coming up and rising up against the Western powers. And we just completed that.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with that at all. That sounds really fascinating. Yeah. Boy, if I had another one, wow, I might.
Well,
but I'm trying to. What I'm doing here is I'm setting up a group of people who are all just like you and me talking on the phone today. These characters are exploring these issues, and it's just such an amazing time right now to go after some of those things, because we're moving into the age of Aquarius, because we're going to have a completely different perspective in the age of Aquarius. There's going to be a complete transformation and we're already experiencing it through technology, which is just going at a dizzying pace. None of us know where this is headed. None of us even can really imagine being alive much longer, if you know what I mean, from one point of view. But we will be, and we will transform, we will change. And I think some of these things I've picked out, like the Fatima prophecies or the Petrus issue of Petrus Romanus, I think that those are going to be revealed fairly soon now. And then another thing I'd like to bring up is another thing fiction gave me the opportunity to do, is it gave me the opportunity to go after an idea like the midline going through Rome. Now, the midline issue is actually scientific, and there's actually some scientific background for it. And, of course, some of that's provided in the novel. But this whole idea that there's a midpoint going all the way through Africa and then through Italy, up through Germany and up through Sweden, that actually affects history is really an interesting idea. And that idea comes from Dr. Carl Kalaman, the Swedish biologist, who's also a calendar researcher and a colleague of mine. And so I'm getting the opportunity to explore that midline because the novel takes place in Rome. And so, Hillary, I don't really know whether that's really true or not. I suspect it is, judging by some of the material that we've gotten, especially from Kalaman. But the novel's giving me the chance to have my characters explore that issue, because this may be a really big deal.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I also like how you covered the macro, you covered the macro with the topics that you brought up in your book, but you also covered the more personal and micro aspect between the two characters, between Sarah and Simon, and how the synergy works with combining minds and hearts and enveloping that whole relationship. And I think people need to really be guided sometimes in how to process these larger, complex energies at work and then apply them to their practical everyday lives. There still seems to be a little gap there. It's closing. People are more getting used to doing that, but you do a really good job of capturing that in the book.
Thanks, and they just came. That's the most amazing thing, is they're just so real to me. In fact, it's hard to socialize right now because I've got this group of people. It's like my friends right now because they're just so rich and deep and fascinating. And then there's other things in the novel, like speaking of the castle up in Tuscany, where there's a lot of family interaction, and in the sequel, the castle in Tuscany is going to be even a bigger feature for all of the characters. And this actually is a place where I know the family and I go there. And so there are rich background issues in this novel where, because I've been able to travel so much and because I've been able to teach so much in foreign countries, it's given me the chance to really bring through some really, really nice material that a lot of us will never get a chance. It's the classical thing. You can armchair travel in a novel. You can take a trip to Tuscany in a novel,
Wow. Barbara, coming up to the top of the hour, just please take a moment to give out your website where people can see information about the book and you and your work.
Yeah, my website is handclow2012.com, just like my name. So it's handclow2012.com. And what I do with that, and my husband Jerry's on it with me too, because he's a cranial sacral healer. And what we do is we share information on where we're going to be traveling and speaking. There's information on how to get a hold of products and stuff like that. And then also I periodically post, usually astrological, where I post something that I think is very important. Like I just did a whole series on the Uranus-Pluto squares, 2012 to 2015, that's posted, and it'll stay up because, as it turns out, that 2012 to 2015 period was the period when we adjusted to the end of the Mayan calendar. And so I just post things that I want to talk about, basically.
Okay. I guess to wrap things up then, and then I'll throw a final thought to Hillary, but I guess maybe you could sum up your favorite, and there's a lot of themes in the book from, I don't know, patriarchy and masculine and feminine and the awakening of the church power and the public mindset, and I just think there's so much in it. What would be your favorite theme or your most important theme that you want the reader to grasp?
I would actually say that the relationships between parents and children. The parents in this novel are really wonderful people, really intelligent, loving, older people. And I'm already getting complaints in reviews from saying there's no parents like that. Well, yes, there is. And so I really, really think it's really important to start remembering how rich our family experience is, and how much our relationship with our parents matters to us, and how much our relationship to our children matters to us. You know, we've had
The
so many
tribe,
years
the
of
health of
shallow fiction, you know, shallow. And
Sure.
it's time to go deep into the family.
Sure. Wow.
Well, I like that as a closing statement. You know, we've talked about a lot of things, and when it comes down to the end of the day, your family is what you're surrounded with, and the health of that family is important. And we all can be better parents and better people in whatever way that means. But Barbara, this was a fascinating read. Thank you so much for doing it, for taking it on.
Thank you for having me. Right.
Yeah, it was great. And for everybody who's listening, go to her website. Her astrology reports and readings are phenomenal. I have lived by them. I have read them. And when she does her periodic post, it's worth it. There's something going on. And she ties it in with current events and things that are relevant to your life. And it's great stuff. Barbara, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. Good luck with the sequel.
Wow, it's been a pleasure talking to you too, Barbara. Today's author is Barbara Han Clow. The name of the book is Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, and it's a fascinating read. Talk to you soon, guys.
Bye.